He doesn't yell, he doesn't insist. Spielberg simply observes, then selects, and once he does so, it doesn't change. For a half-century, Spielberg has informed the emotional vocabulary of film, creating worlds, rewriting history, and directing more icons than any living filmmaker. But under all of that is something more. His capacity to discover the one actor who suits, the one voice he can trust, the one performance which reconfigures everything. He doesn't collaborate with noise, he collaborates with resonance. And his films endure in more than one generation. But at their heart is a performance that grounds the turbulence. Spielberg doesn't just cast talent, he casts gravity. And when someone gives him that, when the trust is full, the work disappears. What's left is something close to myth. He's worked with hundreds, but only a few enter the frame and never left his orbit. The ones who gave him everything and got back something even rarer. Tom Hanks wasn't just cast. He became part of Spielberg's cinematic DNA. From Saving Private Ryan to Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, Bridge of Spies, and The Post, their relationship has been among the most enduring in contemporary Hollywood. Forged not in friendship, but in trust. Hanks once explained, "When Steven calls, I don't ask what it is, I just say yes." And that dictum has provided Spielberg with emotional oxygen for over 2 decades. On Saving Private Ryan, there was little direction, only a nod or a whisper, because Spielberg understood Hanks would always discover the truth. Hanks never steals scenes, he anchors them, with consistency, empathy, and control, as Spielberg lends him legacy, making their work less that of a partnership and more of an ongoing creative fusion. What's so impressive about Hanks is that Spielberg doesn't have to shape him. Other directors push, stretch, insist, but Spielberg trusts. That trust makes Hanks dissolve into roles of ordinary man without ever losing pounds, because for Spielberg, his weight is the essence of the tale. When Hanks walked along the shores of Normandy in Saving Private Ryan, he wasn't just directing soldiers, he was directing the audience through horror, loss, and survival. When he portrayed Carl Hannity in Catch Me If You Can, Spielberg allowed him to be the comic counterpoint to DiCaprio's conman vibe, providing the movie with its pulse. In The Terminal, Hanks made silence, fractured English, and tiny gestures into empathy personified. Spielberg frequently makes a point of saying that Hanks has an aura of reliability about him, and in a sense, Hanks is Spielberg's cinematic compass. Whenever he needs humanity, he reaches for Tom. For Spielberg, Hanks is not merely an actor. He is a reassurance, a testament to the fact that cinema is still capable of carrying warmth even when the subject is dark, chaotic, or politically incisive. Their quiet and consistent rapport has redefined the director-actor equation for contemporary Hollywood. When Spielberg cast Daniel Day-Lewis as Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't casting, it was invocation. Day-Lewis did not rehearse. He changed, so much so that Spielberg went on to say, "He gave me the gift of time travel. There were times when I forgot that we were making a movie." The acting was so professional that Spielberg called him Mr. President on and off set, and not as a stunt, but because the job called for it. And when Day-Lewis won the Oscar, Spielberg did not boast. He just said, "I didn't direct him. I just saw him." Their partnership was short but profound. Lightning in a bottle that transformed how Spielberg perceived silence, pacing, and character. Day-Lewis brought Lincoln something no script could provide: patience. He drew out pauses into politics, whispered into authority, and captured the contradictions of a leader who carried both steel and fragility in his voice. Spielberg himself has always said that Lincoln was one of the most difficult films he ever worked on, not in terms of scale, but in terms of burden. He required someone who could raise the soul of history, and only Day-Lewis possessed that alchemy. Screening dailies, Spielberg has admitted he would sit in stunned silence, unable to make cuts, because he felt history breathing before his eyes. It wasn't acting, it was reincarnation. The irony is that Spielberg and Day-Lewis only worked together once, but that single collaboration redefined what biopic performances could be. Day-Lewis showed Spielberg that sometimes the director doesn't need to steer the ship. Sometimes the actor brings the entire voyage with them, and all the director has to do is keep the water still. And then there is Harrison Ford, above Indiana Jones. He was Spielberg's cinematic North Star. From Raiders of the Lost Ark onwards, Ford provided authenticity at will, whether humor, pathos, or physicality. Spielberg has commented, Harrison brings confidence into a room, and when the camera rolls, that confidence becomes myth. Never flinched, never politicked, simply showed up, bled, groaned, stood back up, and defined what an action hero could be. Ford was not merely dependable for Spielberg. He was the frame itself, turning his presence into legacy. Not just his grit made Ford indispensable. It was his refusal to play caricature. Indiana Jones could have been cartoonish, a pulp figure played for laughs. But Ford gave him bruises, sweat, and a moral compass. Spielberg leaned into that, directing action sequences not as spectacles, but as character studies. When Indy reaches for his hat at the last second or mutters through clenched teeth, those aren't gimmicks. They're proof of Ford's ability to inject humanity into the impossible. And aside from the stunts, Ford had a weathered soul of his own that Spielberg loved. He had an ability to play exhaustion that no one else could match, forcing the audience to feel the price of adventure. They redefined the action hero together, not invincible, but breakable, stubborn, and human. Ford's face later confided in Spielberg an admitted shorthand, a map of pain and will that required no dialogue. In so many ways, Harrison Ford became Spielberg's mirror for his exploration of masculinity on screen. Tough but flawed, assertive but battered, always combative but never invulnerable. Leonardo DiCaprio made his entry into Spielberg's world at a pivotal time, fresh from Titanic when the world had him pegged as a boyish superstar. But Spielberg had in mind something crisper, a scalpel. Catch me if you can prove DiCaprio wasn't charm. He had chaos in his eyes and quiet in his voice, hitting every beat with clockwork accuracy. Spielberg would go on to say later, he's got a clock inside him. He never misses a beat. There is clean and quiet chemistry, rewriting DiCaprio's career in one shot, and while they've only made one film together, Spielberg still refers to him as unfinished business. What DiCaprio brought to Spielberg was urgency. Frank Abagnale Jr. was a character constructed on charm and deceit, but under the suits and the scams, DiCaprio revealed loneliness and desperation. Spielberg went with that, allowing DiCaprio to fuel the film's rhythm like a jazz soloist, constantly improvising yet never behind schedule. It's possible to forget that Catch Me If You Can is really a two-hander between Hanks and DiCaprio, but Spielberg played it like a cat-and-mouse sonata, with DiCaprio's risky volatility going off against Hanks's reassuring rhythm. The effect was cinematic harmony. For DiCaprio, the movie demonstrated that he wasn't simply the pretty boy from Titanic. He was an actor with depth, tragedy, and cunning humor. Spielberg has frequently expressed that he still wishes to do more with Leo, and that unresolved strand is one of Hollywood's finest what-ifs. If their first movie was youth and escape, perhaps their second would be about weight and responsibility. With Meryl Streep, Spielberg took decades to wait, but once she entered the post, he declared her to be indispensable, not to the movie, but to cinema itself. Working with her was like leading a symphony with a solo instrument, her restraint surgical, her presence the room itself. Spielberg acknowledged that he was anxious, something he does not often admit, and afterward mentioned her performance was a masterclass in stillness. Even for one collaboration, it took just one for him to be able to say that he'd never forget her eyes. What Streep brought was authority by vulnerability. Playing Katharine Graham, she didn't command the room with speeches, she occupied it with trepidation, with the bravery to speak when silence was the wiser choice. Spielberg constructed the pace of the film around her breaths, her silences, her self-doubt transformed into strength. Observing her perform, Spielberg averred that he knew what grace under pressure meant. For years, audiences asked why Streep and Spielberg hadn't collaborated earlier, but when they did, it seemed destined. Their work wasn't about repetition so much as culmination. Two geniuses at last together on a canvas, producing a film that echoed beyond politics into issues of courage, truth, and legacy. And then there's Robin Williams, who didn't merely play Peter Pan in Hook. He pulled Spielberg out of one of the toughest shoots of his career. Each night after shooting, Robin would call Spielberg simply to make him laugh, doing a 15-minute improv to pick him up. The movie perhaps wasn't what Spielberg hoped, but what remained wasn't the box office. It was Robin, who brought an adult sorrow to Peter Pan that Spielberg never forgot. Their relationship lasted beyond the movie, and when Robin passed away, Spielberg put off Schindler's List in mourning, afterward commenting, "When he left, the room just dimmed." Robin was not merely an actor to Spielberg. He was a sign of why there is a cinema in existence at all, to cast light into darkness. On location, Williams had a childlike innocence that infected the crew, but beneath it lay a depth that Spielberg immediately sensed.